This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording by Nicholas James Bridgewater. Lesson 2 of the Revelation of Baha'u'llah in a sequence of 4 lessons. Lesson 2. The Bab. When religion goes down and irreligion prevails, I take my birth to establish it again. Sometimes mankind does not realize this until after the light has shone and departed. Such was the case 1900 years ago. Within the past 60 years, a trinity of revelators has appeared upon the earth. These are the promised ones of God. There has been the proclaimer of the coming of truth, the Bab, the revelator of all truth, Baha'u'llah, the deliverer of all truth, Baha. The Bab was a young merchant, born in Shiraz, Persia, a descendant of Muhammad. He bore, very early in life, the marks of a supernatural power, which attracted and impressed all who came in contact with him. It was the early dawn of the light, but the darkness comprehended it not. The word Bab is Arabic and means the gate. In May 1844, which corresponds with our times and a half a time, in the last chapter of the prophetic book of Daniel, he declared his mission and delivered his message. His mission was that of a forerunner and herald. His message was the announcement of the coming of the Perfect One, who, although upon earth, was yet veiled to mortal vision, by whose will he moved, and to the bond of whose love he clung, craving only that his life might be accepted of him as a sacrifice. The utterances of the Bab, although so youthful and so uneducated, moved all hearts, and many believed on his words. The Mohammedans arose to destroy his influence, and persecution of himself and his followers began to appear on all sides. The divines and scholars, by both collective and individual effort, endeavored to quench this fire, but all efforts were as nothing in its presence. Many learned ones sought him for the purpose of pure investigation, and surrendered to the proofs of his claims. One said, "The season of spring and wine has arrived," and "Search after knowledge after reaching the known is culpable." This man of note, Mullah Muhammad Ali, went forth from the presence of the Bab, proclaiming from the pulpit his newly found joy, advising all to drink from the cup of clear water, and wrote his own confession of faith and allegiance to the Bab, and then himself became a target for the malign arrows of Muslim hostility. So powerful became the message of the Bab, so great the results appearing from his words, that grievous persecution, plot and intrigue arose against him and his rapidly augmenting band of believers. But all fell harmless and abortive, and finally the divines, instead of seeking to investigate his claims, began to avoid him. In pulpit and in private they declared the Bab an injurer to religion and state. The Muslims combined and resorted to arms against him and his faithful ones, who rallied together upon the defensive. Although the Babis were feeble in number, starved in body under the long siege of cruelties successively uprising against them, and an army of living skeletons, yet they used to meet their besiegers, fresh from a preparatory night of worship, reading and intoning the sacred texts of the new dispensation with sweet and strange utterances, and antiphonally chanting in perfect music, both spiritually and physically, their new Alleluia, Allahu Baha. Under the power of this exaltation of soul, on the following day they would meet the enemy and conquer. Finally, reduced to a state of siege, through a dastardly intrigue of the Mohammedans, they were drawn into a so-called truce, and when entirely unarmed, half famished and faint, with food placed before them to add to their torture, their treacherous adversaries fell upon them and massacred the majority of them. Even thus they gained their wish, which was to die in the path of their beloved. Such was their unfaltering trust in God. Scores of such incidents are chronicled. Finally, after many dire experiences, such influence was brought to bear upon the authorities that this greatest of heralds, this undaunted and buoyant spirit, the Bab, as the source of all this disturbance, was imprisoned for 9 months in the castle of Maku, which was situated upon an almost inaccessible mountain summit. But even there God took care of him, and raised up friends in some of his attendants. From thence he was removed to the castle of Cherik. Need I state that, notwithstanding this rigour of persecution, and even although under the close personal guard of his implacable enemies, the light which he brought could not be confined, but spread incessantly, and his believers increased in numbers and in steadfastness, neither hunger nor thirst nor stripes nor imprisonment, nor anything, even unto death, produced any effect upon them. Throughout Persia the might of the Bab's declaration absorbed all thoughts, and the Bab, lifted above all the tumult by the light within his soul, restricted himself in his prison cell to repeating his great message concerning and meditating upon the one of whose coming he was the honoured herald. This is one of his meditations. Though the ocean of woe rages on every side, and the bolts of fate follow in quick succession, and the darkness of grief and affliction invades soul and body, yet is my heart brightened by the remembrance of thy countenance, and my soul is a rose garden from the perfume of thy nature. Even while imprisoned, he was summoned before the government tribunal at Tabriz. In vain they tried to condemn him by his own words. Finally one doctor inflicted a brutal scourging upon him, and after this indignity, which he bore with meekness and non-resistance, a sublime proof of the greatness of his mission, they returned him to the prison castle of Cherik. The extraordinary increase in the number of his followers awoke the alarm of the Muslims, and later on, church and state clasped hands and held riot against the faith, combining by every method possible to be devised the uproot of the Babis. Some great personages about this time allied themselves with heart and soul to the cause, among whom was that gifted and beautiful woman, Qurratul Ain, the daughter of a sage, and Mirza Muhammad Ali of Mazandaran. These new accessions arose to serve the faith with such power that naught could put them down. Great slaughters of the Babis followed. Countless cruelties, some too horrible to mention, were inflicted. Their defenceless homes were plundered. They were ambushed and shot down, their bodies ripped open, exposing their vitals. They were burned with hot irons to a crisp. They were cut by many swords, and fell, bleeding at every pore. They were sawn asunder. After life had departed, their heads were cut off, their bodies were hacked and trodden upon. But in the face of all the severest trials and torture, they bore aloft the banner of the faith with a devotion unparalleled in modern times. Joy supernal reigned in their souls, while all about them existed the reign of destruction. The Mohammedans are divided into two great branches, the Sunnites of Turkey and the Shiites of Persia, and these are subdivided into many sects. But no great disturbances had ever existed among them until the Bab arose and declared himself. When this occurred, the darkness became manifest through, and opposed to, the light, but that light shone clearer and ever yet more clear unto the end of this sublime life. It has been said of the Bab that his words so intoxicated his followers with the wine of divine love and wisdom that they forgot all beside, and earthly things became as nothing. The Bab was athirst for martyrdom in the cause of the great tidings which he had declared, and this cup, overflowing with the gift of God, was granted him. On the 8th of July, 1850, in the morning, he was suspended by ropes, and a regiment of soldiers ordered to fire upon him. None of the shots took effect, the slender ropes alone being cut, and when the smoke cleared away, he was found near by, unharmed. Again his enemies suspended him, and gave orders to the soldiers to fire. These, however, made their excuses, and another regiment was summoned, and their volleys liberated his victorious spirit, which passed to the beyond, and rested in the presence of God. Blessed is the body which is cut into pieces for the sake of faithfulness. 6 months before his departure, the Bab sent a sealed epistle to a disciple named Haji Suleiman Khan, instructing him to break the seal only when a grievous sorrow and affliction befell him. when the sacrifice of the Bab's life took place, and this disciple heard the report of the muskets, he knew that this was the event predicted, and broke the seal of the letter. The contents announced that 6 months from the date of writing, the Bab would suffer martyrdom at Tabriz. The date fell exactly on that day. The letter also gave instructions as to the disposition of his body. The disciples went by night to the sentinels who stood guard over the body as it lay in the moat outside of the city walls, with the body of a follower who had determined to die with him, bribed these sentinels, and bore the bodies away. Shrouded in white silk and placed in a chest, they were later removed to Tehran, and in the recent past arrangements were made for a shrine and an interment elsewhere. Thus the Bab fulfilled his holy mission. Since revelation is progressive, the station of the herald is progressive, and the light, which appeared through the Bab and gave its bounties unto all, was a fitting dawn, preceding the splendour so soon to envelop the world. The cycle of the Bab was the cycle wherein he trained and developed the people for the meeting of God, and therefore he called himself the Supreme Lord. After his departure, the fires of persecution were renewed, and thousands of his followers were massacred, and helpless women and little children were ruthlessly trodden down and destroyed. But the word, spoken through this great annunciator, kindled not only the heart of Persia, but spread to other parts of the world, and many, knowing the signs, came to seek its light, and to become confirmed in its great reality, and to bear to other lands its fragrance. The history of the cycle of the Bab is the history of blood. But as one has spoken of these martyrdoms, their blood and clay have formed the foundation stones of this heavenly temple, and verily we know that the foundations of this faith will never be destroyed. The Bab's first believer was Mullah Hussein of Bushrueh, a most eminent Far Eastern divine, who sought him for the purpose of investigation, and became so filled by the power of the utterances of the Bab that he went forth at once to proclaim his message. Thus he was called the Babul Bab, which means the gate of the gate. Also he was called the first letter of the living, there being 18 letters, or the first believers who gathered about the Bab. The Bab was the 19th. He was also the first point, meaning the point of revelation, and of the creational book of God. He left many writings and proofs of the greatness of his mission, and one especial book of prophecy, called Al-Bayan, the Exposition. The whole purport of his words and writings was to prove to the people that he was only a messenger of glad tidings of the coming of a greater one, through whose revelation universal peace would be established. It was to be the day of the reign of God. This message was his joy and comfort in the darkness of his prison. He said, I am a letter out of that most mighty book, a dewdrop from that limitless ocean, and when he shall appear, my true nature, my mysteries, riddles and intimations will become evident, and the embryo of this religion shall develop through all the grades of its being and ascent, attain the most comely of forms, and become adorned with the robe of blessed be God, the best of creators. He said, the whole Bayan revolves around the saying of him whom God shall manifest, and that the Bayan, and such as are believers, yearn more after him than the yearning of any lover after his beloved. Also, if one should hear a single verse from him and recite it, it is better than that he should recite the Bayan 1,000 times. The Bab likewise said, O remnant of God, I am wholly sacrificed unto thee. I am content with curses in thy way. I crave not but to be slain in thy love, and God the Supreme sufficeth as an eternal protection. The Bab fulfilled Muslim prophecy in being the return of the 12th Imam. He fulfilled Zoroastrian prophecy as the dawn of the new day, when 3 chosen ones should appear. The first of this trinity of manifestation was to be like the dawn. He fulfilled Israelitish prophecy as Elijah. The name Elijah has a spiritual significance, and is the symbol of the mission and message of the forerunner. It says, My God is Jehovah. The Bab fulfilled Christian prophecy as the angel, who, with the sound of a trumpet, would precede the coming of the Son of Man. The voice of the trumpet is the voice of the incarnated Word, which spoke through the Bab, and his cycle is the time of the first resurrection. Revelation 4:1. Resurrection is a spiritual awakening in this body of the dust, when the voice of the trumpet calls us, and we arise out of our graves to know God. Muhammad, 1300 years ago, declared of the Bab that in him shall be the perfection of Moses, the preciousness of Jesus, and the patience of Job. His saints shall be abased in his time, and their heads exchanged as presents to their enemies. They shall be slain and burned, and shall be afraid and fearful and dismayed. The earth shall be dyed with their blood, and wailing shall prevail among their women. These are my saints indeed. The Bab never saw the one of whose coming he was the heavenly courtier and herald. His knowledge of him was all from God, but he said of him that no fire was more intense than the fire of turning away from him. It has been almost 60 years since the angel first sounded the trumpet call throughout the earth, and in response to it thousands of the elect have been gathering from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. The Bab's little day of between 5 and 6 wonderful years, as men count years, has passed, and his holy mission has ended, for the effulgence of the revelation of him whom God has manifested, Baha, today is illuminating the world. For he has come, the one who was covenanted has come, and he has declared to the nations and kingdoms of the earth, I am ready, the Father has come, 'tis day break everywhere. Letter from Akka Muhammad Ali of Tabriz, who suffered death with his master the Bab, written to his brother who desired him to recant. He is the compassionate. O thou who art my Qibla, my condition, thanks to God, has no fault, and to every difficulty succeedeth ease. You have written that this matter has no end. What matter then has any end? We at least have no discontent in this matter, nay, rather we are unable sufficiently to express our thanks for this favour. The end of this matter is, to be slain in the way of God, and oh, what happiness is this! The will of God will come to pass with regard to his servants. Neither can human plans avert the divine decree. What God wills comes to pass, and there is no power and no strength but in God. O thou who art my Qibla, the end of the world is death. Every soul tastes of death. If the appointed fate which God, mighty and glorious is he, hath decreed, overtake me, then God is the guardian of my family, and thou art mine executor. Behave in such wise as is pleasing to God, and pardon whatever has proceeded from me, which may seem lacking in courtesy, or contrary to the respect due from juniors, and seek pardon for me from all those of my household, and commit me to God. God is my portion, and how good is he as a guardian. End of Lesson 2.